The 2019 NFL Draft is now in the books. It's so crazy. It literally just started. It feels like it was yesterday. I mean, technically, as of I'm recording this, it was the day before yesterday, but that's besides the point. Today, we have one of two episodes for my NFL Draft grades. Today, we will be grading each NFC team on how they did, and then a later video today will be my grades for all the AFC teams. We're going to go division by division because that's how I like to organize it. I just think that that's just easier and simpler. So without further ado, let's get right into it. We all know the worst for first saying, so my worst grade in the entire draft goes to the New York Giants, so we're going to start with them. I am giving the Giants a D. Not a fan of what they did. They have 3 first-round picks, and I think they messed up big time. At 6, they took Daniel Jones, quarterback Duke. Obviously, that's a huge reach. People are saying they could have gotten him at 17. I don't think he would have been on the board at 17, so I applaud Gettleman for getting his guy now, but I don't think that was a good pick regardless. I think he chose the wrong guy. I think they should have gone Dwayne Haskins or picked a different player, maybe a Josh Allen per se, and then get Drew Lock at 17. And I'm just not a huge fan of Daniel Jones. I don't hate him as much as most people do. I shouldn't say most people. I don't dislike him as much as some people do, but I'm definitely not a Daniel Jones fan. He was my number 5 quarterback in this class. And to put things in perspective, my number 4 quarterback was Tyree Jackson, who was not drafted. So that kind of says something. But their upper first-rounders, they took Dexter Lawrence and then traded up to get DeAndre Baker. I thought Lawrence at 17 was a reach. I had him pretty much at the end of the first round in my big board. He's a solid player, but I saw something where an AFC executive said he's basically Danny Shelton and Vita Vea, which I sort of see. Nose tackle, pretty good run stuffer, big body inside, but doesn't really give you that much pass rush and is a so-so player. Danny Shelton didn't really work out in Cleveland. Doesn't really look like Vita Vea is going to work out in Tampa Bay. And I just see similar results with Dexter Lawrence. I mean, they do got Lawrence at nose tackle and then Dalvin Tomlinson and B.J. Hill at end. That's not too bad. I'm curious to see how that unit does. And then at 30, DeAndre Baker, corner from Georgia. I don't hate this pick. I like DeAndre Baker. I think I had him in that same Dexter Lawrence end of a first round range, so technically it's not bad value, but they could have had Greedy Williams or Byron Murphy, who I like a lot more. Yeah, Greedy did slip, and I know we all didn't expect that, but at the time, and still now, I think Greedy would have been a better pick at 30, or obviously they could have stayed with their original second-round pick and got him. And then after that, O'Shane, Jimenez, Julian Love, those are both solid value picks, and then the only other pick that really stands out is Darius Slayton from Auburn, speedster. I think he could be dynamic on special teams, but all around, bad draft in my opinion for the Giants. Now on to the Washington Redskins. Now, as tradition, I only give out one A+ every year, and I was really tempted to give it to Washington. However, I decided not to, but they get a high A. I think Washington had the second best draft out of any team, and the best draft overall in the conference, starting at 15 with Dwayne Haskins. That's a steal. Haskins, it was my number 2 quarterback in the draft behind Kyler Murray, but that's just because we haven't seen someone like Kyler Murray before with his dynamic skill set. Haskins is the best pure passer in this draft. I had them trading up to 3 to get him in my mock, so the fact that they were able to get him at 15 is incredible. And then they traded up for Montez Sweat, giving up a second this year and next year, which is really solid value. Sweat doesn't get enough credit for what he does on the field. Obviously, the speed is there. He did sort of fall because of a heart issue, but that doesn't even seem like a big deal, and it seems like some of those reports could be false. And I think the Redskins had a really good round 1 with 2 very nice value picks. And then round 3, Terry McLaurin, wide receiver, Ohio State. He has solid height at 6 foot, really fast, really dynamic, and he's the type of player I really like. I had him as an early second round guy in my big board. And then after that, Bryce Love. He has all the talent in the world, but he's very injury prone. I thought round 4 is a little bit high. And then other value picks, Ross Pierschbacher, not bad value. And then one of my favorite value picks in the draft, Kelvin Harmon, late in round 6. I had him as my number 10 overall receiver, higher than players like Mecole Hardman, who was a second-round pick. Kelvin Hardman has a really big body, really solid red zone threat. Should be fun for Dwayne Haskins and his new targets. Next up, we have the Philadelphia Eagles, and I give them a solid B. They moved up 3 spots, only giving up a 4 and a 6, which isn't really too bad, to select Andre Dillard, tackle from Washington State. While I like Jawan Taylor a little bit more, I guess Dillard was their guy. It's a very untold secret that the Texans were going to go Dillard at 23. That really would not shock anyone, and they had to jump Houston to do it. Dillard is the best pass blocker in this draft class, but we need to see more of him as a run blocker. But the Eagles need pass blocking. They need to keep Carson Wentz upright, and Jason Peters, he's going to get injured by week 5, so Dillard will get some nice PT. I like Jawan Taylor more, but I think this is still a solid value pick nonetheless. Then round 2, Miles Sanders and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. Sanders is a solid player. He had a good combine net production at Penn State. I thought there were better running backs in this draft like Justice Hill, Rodney Anderson, who were day 3 picks. And then J.J. Arcega-Whiteside from Stanford. I would say this is fair value. Pretty big body. Not the quickest. I don't think he has a crazy ceiling, but I do like his floor, and I think he is a pretty solid player. And then in day 3, Sharif Miller and Clayton Thorson, quarterback from Northwestern. I'm not huge on Studfield, or as I like to say, Sud the Stud, Nate Sudfield. I just don't really see him as a backup quarterback. I think they need an extra one, and that can be Thorson, who's shown a ton of flashes at Northwestern, but is not the most consistent. I'm giving the Dallas Cowboys a solid B as well. They did not have a first-round pick as it went to Oakland for Amari Cooper. That looks like a really nice deal for Dallas, but I did not impact it into the grading. So with their first selection, Tristan Hill, D-tackle from UCF, I thought that was a little bit high for him, but they do need a defensive tackle since David Irving retired due to smoking that weed. Round 3, Connor McGovern, solid value, and they could use an extra offensive lineman. And then other notable picks, I thought Michael Jackson was solid value out of Miami, and then Joe Jackson also out of Miami. I thought those two were both pretty solid value picks late in the 5th round. Mike Weber in the 7th from The Ohio State University. I thought that was a pretty interesting pick. Him and J.K. Dobbins had a nice connection. And now him and Tony Pollard, who they had drafted in the 4th round, will be backing up Zeke. And then Jalen Jelks late in the 7th round. Go Ducks. I think the value there is solid. I don't think Jelks is great, but in round 7, someone who can play end as well as linebacker, I think that's a nice pick by Dallas. And I think all around, they did not have a crazy draft, but they drafted some talented players who I think could be used very nicely. Now on to the NFC North, starting with my Detroit Lions. And I'm going to give us a B-. I'm not too thrilled with our draft. That's mainly because of day 2. With the first pick, or the first round, our first pick, we took T.J. Hawkinson, tight end from Iowa. I'm fine with the pick, not the move I would have made. I would have chosen Ed Oliver, even though we don't need D-tackle. Ed Oliver is just such a good player. We could figure something out. But we do sort of need a tight end. I think we have bigger needs. I think Jesse James is a starting caliber tight end in this league. But Hawkinson's a very safe pick. Good blocker, good receiver. Pretty much gives you everything. He's going to make an impact on the passing game as well as the run game. Now, round 2, this is where things start to get funky. Could have had Greedy Williams, who was the number 9 overall player on my board. Could have had DK Metcalf, who was the number 6 overall player on my board. Could have had Nasir Adderley, my 21st on the board. And I just really like Adderley, so that's who I wanted to mention. But we took Jelani Tavai. I did not know we were that desperate to move Jared Davis outside. I figured if we picked Devin White or Devin Bush in the first round, then it made sense. But this is such a huge reach. We could have easily traded down and get him. I know New England like him, so I guess traded late in the 2nd round if we really wanted to get him. But I think this is way too early. I thought it was 5th round talent. I would have preferred like a Voshawn Joseph, Blake Cashman, Mack Wilson. Even though I think all three of those guys were 5th round picks, I like all three of them more. And then we traded up for Will Harris. I would have preferred Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but Harris is a solid player, pretty versatile. He can play corner, he can play safety. That's an okay pick. Round 4, Austin Bryant, really nice production at Clemson, but that could be because of all the talent around him. And then my favorite pick in this draft in the 5th round, Amani Oruwariye, corner from Penn State. I had him somewhere in my top 50, so obviously value-wise this was a steal. I love this selection, and I think he can be a solid starter in the NFL. Unlike potentially Jelani Tavai, I'm really getting Kyle Van Noy flashbacks with that pick. So, all around, not a great draft for my Lions, but the Oruwariye selection definitely made the pain go out a little bit. Now on to my good buddy, the Green Bay Packers. I'm giving them a B+. With their first rounder, they took Rashawn Gary, defensive lineman from Michigan. I really like Gary. I know a lot of people don't. And it's sort of hard to see him go to the Packers, who I just hate the Packers. And it's going to be hard to root against him because I do really like him. But the Packers don't need defensive line, but I think value-wise, this was definitely one of the best players on the board, at least in my opinion. But they added a bunch of edge rushers. They have Kenny Clark, and they are 3-4, so I assume, at least early on, Gary could be a rotational guy, and he is. Apparently has a torn labrum, so I guess this can make him recover easier, and he might not be as needed right away. And then the Packers traded up for safety Darnell Savage from Maryland. Very fast, definitely a draft day riser. Was not my number 1 safety. That was Nasir Adderley. I think Savage was somewhere between 4 and 6. So I don't love him. I think I probably had him in my top 50 or just barely missing out on my top 50. I think he's a solid player, but does have some work to do. And I think they could have gone with someone better, like a Nasir Adderley. Elton Jenkins, offensive lineman for Mississippi State in round 2. Really like him, really like his versatility. I'm really sad to see him go into the Packers. Jay Sternberger in the 3rd round. Talented receiver, not a great blocker, however. And other than that, not a flashy day 3, but they made some solid picks, like Kingsley Keke in the 5th round. Now on to the Minnesota Vikings. They get a B. Solid draft for the Vikings. Nothing too exciting, but I definitely think it was a solid one. They took Garrett Bradbury in the 1st, 18 overall. Solid pick. He can play guard. He can play center. Really athletic. Definitely had a really nice off-season. And he's someone who's going to be plug-and-play starting right away. Round 2, Irv Smith, tight end, Alabama. I had him probably at like 31 on my big board. So a first-round talent, in my opinion. Good blocker, good receiver. Him and Kyle Rudolph will complement each other very well. And then he can be the main tight end once Kyle Rudolph leaves. Alexander Madison in the 3rd. I thought that was a little bit high, especially considering guys like Justice Hill and Ronnie Anderson still on the board. But I do think Madison is a talented player. And then they had a bunch of picks late. Drew Samia, nice value in the 4th. Dylan Mitchell, solid value in the 7th, along with Chris Boyd, who is not a great coverage corner, but he does have some talent. And I think all around, not a flashy draft for the Vikings, but they did the dirty work. Now on to the Chicago Bears. Of course, they traded their 1st and 2nd round pick to Khalil Mack. Great trade for the Chicago Bears. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm not grading off of pre-trades before the draft. So they traded up and got David Montgomery in the 3rd round. I don't love Montgomery. I think he was my number 6 overall running back. And I believe he was the 3rd or 4th taken. So I don't love him, but they do need a running back to replace Jordan Howard. And I think Montgomery can do that. Riley Ridley in the 4th. Good route runner, but not a great athlete, not the most explosive, and that doesn't really fit a need. And then they didn't have any other late-round picks that really stood out to me. So all around, I think it was a pretty below-average draft for the Bears. Nothing really too exciting, and I don't really think they drafted any game-changing players. Yeah, they didn't have game-changing picks, but I feel like the only solid value pick was Riley Ridley, and that wasn't really a position of need, so. Now on to the Arizona Cardinals, and I will give them an A. I think the Cardinals had a really nice draft. Of course, they had the number 1 overall pick, in which they took Kyler Murray, quarterback from Oklahoma. And the reason why I like that pick is because I just don't see Josh Rosen leading them to a Super Bowl. And I think Kyler Murray has the potential to do that. So I think Arizona is making the right move in doing that. Meanwhile, obviously, they spent the 10th pick on Josh Rosen last year and just only got the 62nd. So obviously, it definitely was a waste. They could have gotten Derwin James, Leighton Vander Esch, Darius Leonard, a bunch of good players at 10 who would really have transformed their team. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten pick number 1, though. Maybe they'd have to trade up. So I guess you could look at it that way. Then in round 2, Byron Murphy, corner from Washington. Greedy was on the board, and I think Greedy's going to be better. However, this is solid value, as Murphy's a high instinct, hard worker. He's going to contribute right away at sort of a position of need, as Patrick Peterson and Byron will be on the outside, and then Byron Murphy's former college teammate, Budda Baker, on the inside at the nickel, and I think that's really solid. And then with that pick they got from Miami, Andy Isabella, wide receiver from from UMass. As I was trying to say, they stole him away from New England, and I think a lot of us are very happy about that. We know what Bill Belichick would probably turn Isabella into. I guess he'll sort of replace what J.J. Nelson was supposed to do and wasn't. Someone who is blazing fast, can stretch the field. 3rd round, Zach Allen, edge rusher, Boston College. Solid value here. They could use another edge rusher alongside Chandler Jones. And I think this is a pretty nice value pick, as I said. Round 4, Hakeem Butler, the first pick of the 4th round. I graded him as my number 3 overall receiver. Better than N'Keal Harry and Marquise Brown, who were first-rounders. And I had a late first-round grade on Hakeem Butler, so I really liked him. Sort of a poor man's DK Metcalf. Really fast, big frame, jump ball radius. Really good pick by the Cardinals. Deontay Thompson in the 5th round. He showed a ton of potential with Alabama this year. Sort of tailed off towards the end of the year and did not participate in the Combine due to an injury. It is sort of a risk, but I like the upside in round 5. I think a team in the late 2nd or early 3rd should have considered him, and I think that's the range he should have gone. And then they also had Mr. Irrelevant taking Caleb Wilson, tight end from UCLA. I graded him as a 3rd round prospect. I really like Caleb Wilson, very athletic, poor man's Noah Fant, really fast, can stretch the field, and I think that was an amazing Mr. Irrelevant for the Cardinals to cap off what was an amazing draft for them. Now on to the San Francisco 49ers. I'm going to give them a B. They took Nick Bosa, number 2 overall, the pass rusher from The Ohio State University. Bosa was my number 3 player on the board, behind Quinnen Williams and Ed Oliver. However, I do think that's the right pick for them. I think Solomon Thomas is more of an interior defensive lineman rather than an edge rusher. So I think the Niners do have a need for edge rusher alongside D. Moore. And Bosa is a very safe prospect. He'll be really good for them. And I think that was the right pick. But then after that, the Niners did not have a great day 2 or day 3 in my opinion. Deebo Samuel, wide receiver, South Carolina. I think that was a little bit too high considering the other receivers on the board. Samuel is also a safe pick as sort of a slot guy. Not the biggest, not the fastest, but he's sort of a Mr. Reliable, pretty good route runner, pretty good hands. But then what confuses me is they go with another receiver, Jalen Hurd in the 3rd round from Baylor. He was a running back at Tennessee, so you know he's going to be good with the ball in his hands. So he's sort of a different player to Deebo Samuel, but now they have those two along with Dante Pettis and Marquise Flash Goodwin. So I'd think they would probably try to address a bigger need like offensive line or secondary rather than doubling down on receiver. And then round 4, they take a punter. A punter. They could use O-line. They could use secondary. They traded down from the 2nd pick in the 4th round to get this one. They could have picked like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson or Drew Samia. Someone like that I think would have made a ton more sense for the 49ers. So I think they made the right pick with Nick Bosa. But after that, a pretty disappointing draft after the 1st round for San Francisco. Seattle Seahawks will also get a B. They entered the week with only 5 picks, and now they have 11. They traded Frank Clark for pick 29 and a future second. I think that's pretty solid value. And then they had pick 21, which they traded down to 30, and then traded down again out of the first round. But they still have 29 from KC, which they got LJ Collier, edge rusher from TCU. They have to improve that pass rush now that Frank Clark is gone. I thought that was a little bit high for Collier. I liked Chase Winovich, Zach Allen, and Jalen Ferguson a little bit more than him. But I do think he is a pretty talented player. Round 2, Marquise Blair, safety from Utah. I thought that was also a little bit of a reach, but safety is in need now that Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor are gone. And then to end the second round, they trade up with New England and draft DK Metcalf, wide receiver from Ole Miss. If it weren't for him, this draft would be at best a C+. At best. But they took, in my opinion, the steal of the draft in DK Metcalf. Apparently, Doug Baldwin may never play it down again because of injuries. And they got, I think, the best overall offensive player in the entire draft in Metcalf. Yeah, he's raw. He's not a great route runner. He has an injury history. But a player of his build, with his athleticism, it reminds me a lot of Calvin Johnson and Julio Jones. And while he does not have the college production, I think he has potential to be one of the best receivers in the NFL. This is a phenomenal value selection for Seattle. And then after that, nothing too exciting. I think a B might have been a little bit generous on my part, but that's just because I love the Metcalf selection so much. And I love that they traded down so much, moving from 5 picks to 11. They took a few reaches like Cody Barton in the 3rd round. I thought that was awfully high. But all around, I think Seattle got someone with superstar potential. And it doesn't really matter where you draft him if he turns into one of the best receivers in the NFL. Now on to the LA Rams, and I give them a B. I think it might be a little bit harsh. Maybe this is more of a B+, but I'm going to go with a B. So they traded down a decent bit, which I like. Their original first-round pick was 31, but then they moved back twice, I believe. So their first pick ended up being 61, which was Taylor Rapp, safety from Washington. High-instinct player. I think this is pretty nice value. I think I probably had him in the 40s in my big board, so solid value. Unfortunately for them this year, I really did just go the pick before. Would that be who they have taken? I don't know, but if I was the GM, that's who I would have taken had he been on the board at 61. And then a puzzling move, in my opinion. They move up for Darrell Henderson. I don't really get this. Yeah, Todd Gurley's knee is a giant question mark, and they lost C.J. Anderson because he's with the dark side now, baby. But that's besides the point. They do need a compliment for him, and I think it makes sense to draft a running back, but I think 3rd round is a little bit high, and I think trading up for Darrell Henderson is a little bit high. Henderson is far from C.J. Anderson. I mean, they're polar opposites. Henderson is small, not super powerful, but it is pretty explosive and agile, and I just don't get trading up for him. Clearly, they think there's something wrong with Todd Gurley's knee if that's the case. Obviously, they do need a compliment regardless, but I think 3rd round is quite high for that unless they know there's seriously an issue. And then 9 picks later, David Long, corner from Michigan. Solid pick. I think I probably had him as a late 2nd, early 3rd round grade, so value-wise not bad, and I do think they need a corner. Marcus Peters overrated. Aqib Talib is getting up there in age. And then Nicole Roby-Coleman should have been called for a penalty in the NFC Championship. So they could use an extra one, probably depth this season, but long-term, I think David Long could be pretty good. Bobby Evans, solid value. David Edwards, solid value. And overall, not a flashy draft from the Rams. As I said, B might be a little bit harsh, but that's what I'm going to give them. So, sort of like the 49ers draft, I love the first-round pick for the Bucs, and after that, it really goes downhill. Devin White, he was number 5 on my draft board. They got him at 5. It would have been hard to choose between him and Allen. If I had to choose, I'd probably say Allen. But I don't think it's a bad move by getting White. Very explosive player, extremely athletic. Very much like Roquan Smith from last year. Overall, great pick. That gets an A. But after that, it's ugly after that. Sean Bunting at round 2 and then Jamel Dean at round 3, both of whom are corners. And didn't they just draft Carlton Davis and MJ Stewart in the 2nd round last year? And didn't they invest a first-round pick in Vernon Hargreaves in 2016? That's 5 corners in the first 3 rounds since 2016. Unless there's someone I'm forgetting about since then, which I know there's not. Justin Evans is not a corner. Roberto Aguayo is obviously not a corner. Noah Spence isn't a corner. So no one who I'm forgetting who at least is noticeable. But still, that's a lot of corners that they've invested in. And I just don't get it. They have bigger needs. Maybe quarterback, depending on who you talk to. A few offensive line spots. Potentially D-tackle if they trade Gerald McCoy. Edge rusher. Probably another safety alongside Justin Evans. Kicker. Oh, wait. No, they don't need a kicker because they got Matt Gay. But that's besides the point. Don't get there day 2. And then day 3, Anthony Nelson, solid value. Mike Evans, he was actually a day 2 pick. I forgot to mention him. A little bit high, but I mean, at least he's not a corner. He is a defensive back, though, so 3 defensive backs on day 2. But Anthony Nelson in the 4th round, solid value. Matt Gay, the kicker, at least they didn't trade up in the 2nd round to get him, so I guess that's a positive. The Atlanta Falcons get a B, and that is a very, very generous B, because value-wise, they definitely made some puzzling picks in getting Chris Lindstrom at 14 and then trading up at 31 to get Caleb McGarry. Value-wise, not great, but I respect what Atlanta's doing. They don't have too many holes on their roster, but they could use offensive line, and they're understanding that. They're going all in, and I think that's the right move. I think they have the talent to do it. Getting a plug-and-play starter and Lindstrom, getting a plug-and-play starter in McGarry, even though they gave up their day 2 picks. Value-wise, not good, but they're getting 2 starters on the offensive line, so I don't really think you can get too mad at that. Obviously, they could have gone with Jawan Taylor at either of those spots, Cody Ford at either of those spots, and then at 14, Andre Dillard was still on the board, and so was Garrett Bradbury. And they could have gone Elgton Jenkins at either spot. So there's so many players, Dalton Reisner, so many players who they could have gotten who would have been better value picks. But they still got offensive line, and I still respect it nonetheless. And then after that, not a great day 3, but Kendall Sheffield is pretty fast, so they could use corners. I think all they really have is Desmond Trufant, who is super injury prone. So all around, value-wise, awful draft for the Falcons, but they addressed needs, they did the dirty work, and I think it's a solid draft for the Falcons. Could be pretty good, could be pretty bad. I really don't feel right in giving the Falcons and the Panthers the same grade. I think the Panthers made much better value selections, but as I said, I respect the Falcons for building in the trenches. So they took Brian Burns at 16. I don't love Burns as much as other people do, but he's very explosive, very fast, well-rounded pass rusher, and I think that's the right pick for Carolina. Probably the pick that I would make. Pretty safe, but I do like his ceiling. Round 2, they traded up for Greg Little. Cody Ford was on the board. Dalton Reisner was on the board. I like both of those 2 more, but I know they really liked Greg Little. I think they talked to him like 4 times or something. I think they had 4 visits with him, so they clearly really liked him, and props to them for making a move with him. Round 3, Will Grier, quarterback, West Virginia. I did not think they were actually going to pull the trigger on a quarterback in round 2 or 3, and they ended up doing it. And I understand it. Cam Newton needs to stay healthy, and they need to have a good backup behind him. But I don't love Will Grier. Tyree Jackson was on the board, and I mean, Tyree Jackson was on the board for the rest of their picks, but I think if they picked a quarterback, I think it should have been Ryan Finley. I'm not huge on Finley. He's my number 10 quarterback. Grier is my number 6, so you're probably telling me, why should they do that? I like Finley as a backup. I really care about players' ceilings, which is why he was that low, and Finley does not have a great ceiling to me. But I think a team like Carolina or Philadelphia should have gotten Ryan Finley because they have very injury-prone quarterbacks, and they need to have good backups for the long run. And then after that, no picks that really stand out to me value-wise. I think all 4 of their day 3 picks were decent value. None of them really eye-popping, however. Last but not least for today's video is the New Orleans Saints. I'm going to give them an A-. They moved up in the second round, I believe 14 spots to get Eric McCoy, the center from Texas A&M. They gave up a number 2 next year, which is a little bit of a lot for moving up 14 spots, but for getting a really talented player, I think I probably had him in the high 40s if I were to guess on my draft board, which could be a little bit harsh. He's very athletic, he's versatile, probably going to replace Max Unger at that center position. All-around really nice pick. Round 4, they traded up to get Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. That is a steal. He can play safety, he can play nickel corner, and I think value-wise, phenomenal move for the Saints. And then Khalil Mack in the 7th round. Pretty solid value there. I thought he should have gone in like the 4th or 5th. So that'll do it for the video. Do you agree? Do you disagree with your team's grade? Let me know in the comments section below. I think I was a little bit generous with some of these grades, considering I think the only teams to have lower than a B- were the Giants and the Bears, which is a little bit crazy, but I'm generous with these draft grades. I'm optimistic for these teams, and while it might not be the slap in the face that they deserve, it's optimism and it's respect. Looking at you, Atlanta.